Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so let's get started. Thanks, first of all, to NetSoc for inviting me along. Thanks to everybody who's taken the time to dial in as well. Um, let's go through these reasonably quickly, and then at the end we can have a bit of question time. Okay, so my name is Tom Shaw. I'm currently a principal automation engineer at Digit Games. I've been there for just over a year now. My background kind of covers a lot of different sort of areas within tech. I started off in 2002, so almost 20 years ago, working as a QA engineer at Sun Microsystems, and I kind of worked my way through the the stack over the years. I've been a configuration manager, I've done dev work, build engineering, systems engineering. So I've kind of tried my hand at a bunch of different areas within tech. I've also had the opportunity to work in very different sectors. I've worked in finance, I've worked in gaming. So I've seen lots of different teams. I've seen lots of different cultures, and I'm going to touch on some of this later on, like the importance of having a healthy culture within the workplace. As Michael said, I'm also a Docker captain. I've organized the Docker meetup since 2014, and founder of ShipItCon. ShipItCon is a conference about software delivery. We have speakers in from all over the world. We've hosted 2 of them. We're hoping to host another one next year. Okay, so this is a very rough agenda. I'm going to start off by just asking the question, what is inclusive engineering? And then we'll look at teamwork and how important teamwork is. And then the diversity within a team, how does that impact delivering inclusive products and services? And then we'll talk a bit about intentional inclusion. Is this something, can we build inclusion into our products? And then we'll cover a few takeaways at the end. I just want to make a disclaimer at the start. I'm not used to talking about non-technical topics. I'm normally talking about containers or build engineering or infrastructure topics. So this is kind of different for myself, but hopefully you find it useful. I think there's some good information in here to kind of help you whenever you get your first job working in the tech industry. Hopefully you can take some of this content and apply it to your first job. Okay, so let's start off. What is inclusive engineering? I'm just going to read through this, but the most important 5 words are in bold. Inclusive engineering is the discipline of ensuring that engineering products and services are accessible and inclusive of all users and are as free as possible from discrimination and bias. It is a way of ensuring that engineering is appropriate, ethical, accessible, and as risk-free as possible. Okay, this doesn't really apply to only engineering products. Any product or service that has a user can potentially apply inclusive techniques to make the products more accessible to a global audience. I'm going to cover later on how the scope of your product opens up whenever you start to look at it from a D&I perspective. Whereas the scope of your product kind of contracts whenever you're only focused on a very specific demographic. Okay, so this sounds awesome. If we can build products and services that everybody wants to use and that covers every demographic, covers cultures, and you have a really wide global user base, that sounds like heaven. You're going to make a lot of money, you're going to be very successful. But how do we reach that state of nirvana? Okay, so the tech industry struggles with diversity, and it struggles even more with inclusion. One of the reasons it struggles is because we can't go and buy inclusion. The tech industry tends to just throw money at problems. This is something that Google can't solve, Amazon can't solve. And that's why we're talking about it so much now, because this is a really tricky, it's not so much an issue, it's just a difference in the way we need to think about our products and services. So we can't buy inclusion. We also can't pray for inclusion. You can try, but it's probably not going to get you too far. And then the last option is to just maybe wish for inclusion. It's almost that time of year. If you've been good, maybe you'll be able to build products and services that are inclusive. But there's really only one way to build inclusion into your products, and that's through the team. If you take a look in the mirror, if you look at yourself and your teammates, if you're working in a monoculture, or if everybody in your team like is pretty much from the same demographic. Like typically it's like white tech bros. If you all look the same and think the same and act the same, it's very hard to build a product that's truly inclusive and accessible. So this talk is mostly focused on the team. Being in a team will have a massive impact on your careers. Working in a healthy team can really just, like the sky's the limit. If you work in a team with really fantastic colleagues who kind of push you to work a wee bit harder or look at problems from different angles, like that can really set up your career to take in all sorts of directions. Unfortunately, if you work in a team that's more closed-minded and aren't as open to change, it can also really harm your career if you get stuck in a team like that. So I guess like my first main point is teamwork is important. Knowing how to work in a team is kind of critical. Throughout your career, you'll probably be in teams for most of it. You might, on occasion, be working as like a lone wolf where it's just yourself doing work, but generally you have to interact with other folks within the organization. And one of the greatest values you can add to an organization is to know how to work within a team. And not everybody does. I've worked with engineers who are extremely clever, extremely talented, but when it comes to working in a team, they just don't operate well. They prefer to work on their own. And that can be fine, but ideally, if you can get a team working together well, then there's like lots of advantages to working in a high throughput or highly efficient team. I'm going to cover 5 of those main takeaways. Okay, so far it sounds kind of obvious, like teamwork is good, but let's delve down a bit more and find out exactly why teamwork is important for building like truly accessible and inclusive products. So first of all, if you're working in a highly functional team and everybody understands the strengths and weaknesses of each other, it means that things just move a lot smoother. Okay, it allows you to remove red tape. If you work in a high trust team, you don't have this situation where you're constantly validating each other's work and trying to make sure everybody is doing what they're supposed to. If you work in a team that's high trust, you can just move much faster. And it's a more enjoyable experience as well. You're less likely to have micromanagement, and you can really just push yourself to kind of try different directions, and you kind of lose a bit of that fear. So yeah, that's one of the reasons like you want to work in a team that's like highly functional or high trust environment. The next piece is like flexibility. Whenever you have a team that has different perspectives and has different ways of looking at problems and maybe has different ways of working, then you become much more flexible. If you have a team where everybody is on a 9-to-5 schedule and they all approach problems in the same way, you're not really that flexible whenever it comes to like change or whenever something goes badly wrong. So if you have that bit of diversity within the team, it gives you flexibility to change, not just for customers, but also for like changes that are happening in society as well. Your team becomes much more resilient. Okay, so whenever you work in a team, you also have access to a lot more perspectives on a problem. One of the issues with like lone wolf developers or 10x developers or whatever you want to call them, some of them call themselves ninjas and all that sort of jazz, they have a very narrow view of the world. So whenever it comes to solving problems, they tend to get themselves stuck in a particular way of solving the problem. Whereas if you're in a highly functional team with all these different perspectives, you can come up with different problem solving techniques and different solutions. So you're much more likely to come up with a solution that actually delivers what the customer wants, instead of trying to force your solution on the customer because you have quite a narrow perspective on the actual problem. Okay, so teamwork improves productivity. If you have one person trying to solve a problem, like they only have a certain amount of hours in the day, they have a very limited scope, very limited perspective. If you have a team of folks who work well together, they can kind of bounce ideas off each other. They can explore different avenues to solve problems. And generally, just it's a nicer atmosphere to work in. You know, you have support if like something really goes badly wrong, you're not on your own trying to solve it. You can work with your team to try and come up with the best solution. So teamwork, like highly functional team, will be productive. It's also good for your own self-development. You can really like advance your career a lot if you're working in a team where you have a good mixture of junior, mid-level, and senior folks within the team. That can really help you to push your career forward much more quickly than if you're on your own or just working in a team with maybe senior folks. It's good to have that mixture of experience levels within the team. And then good teamwork, it motivates folks. So if anybody plays sports at all, you know how great the feeling is whenever you win a trophy or win a match. It's the same within the workforce. Like you might have a project that you're working on for a year, and whenever you actually sign off that project and everybody's happy, like it's a great feeling, and it helps motivate folks to work as a team in future. There is the downside as well. If you work on a project that doesn't go well, you still have the support from the rest of your team, and hopefully you're in a situation where you can kind of help each other get over it and move on to the next project. If you're working on your own, you don't really have that sort of emotional crutch to lean on, and things can get quite bad if a project's gone badly and you don't really have anybody to reach out to. So a team kind of gives you that extra support. Okay, so it's not just about teamwork. Like team diversity is really important as well. You'll probably find yourselves in the future, hopefully working for some large tech companies or gaming companies. You might be in teams where everybody just looks the same. I've worked in an engineering organization that had 40 engineers, and they all just looked like myself. We were on a video call once. We were all like middle-aged guys wearing plaid shirts with beards. It's a bit disturbing. You probably will be in that situation at some points, but hopefully you get yourself into a team where it's really truly diverse and you're working with people from all over the world, all demographics, genders, just a really good mix of folks that can help you like learn faster and just make your work experience a lot more enjoyable. So we're going to look at team diversity. This is what the tech industry kind of looks like at the moment, unfortunately. Not all of it, but large chunks of it. It's a bunch of white dudes who are overconfident and just really haven't got a clue. This is why we need team diversity. We don't want a bunch of like yes men or yes women in the room. We want folks that will challenge you, like, but in a good way. They want you to expand your own experience. They want to make a great product or great service. So it's okay to work with people who say no or who'll ask you questions. That's much healthier than working with folks who just say yes all the time. So why is team diversity important? Well, first of all, like building stuff is really, really easy. You can put together a team of engineers, you can give them money, you can give them time, and they're going to build something. Like it might not be very useful. Customers might not want it, but they're going to build something. Like engineers, developers, they love building stuff. If you're trying to build stuff that a specific customer wants, it's still hard, but it's not impossible. So for example, if you're trying to build a toy for, I don't know, say boys aged 4 to 10, like Hot Wheels does a pretty good job. You have quite a narrow scope, so you know who you're trying to target. But if you're trying to build something that spans entire societies, demographics, cultures, building a product that everybody wants, it's almost impossible if you're working in a team where everybody is thinking the same and everybody's looking the same. So what is the solution? The solution is to make the team as diverse as possible. Ideally, your team will almost match your customer base or as close as possible. So this is a really nice quote. The important part is the end. Like diverse teams will do impossible things. If you're in a team that isn't diverse, you kind of will hit the glass ceiling of innovation and creating products. Whereas if you're in a diverse team, the sky is really the limit. Like you're bringing in all these different life experiences in. And yeah, it's just a great sort of way to build your career. Okay, so what do we mean by diversity? Well, basically including folks from like different societies, cultures, genders, traditions, race, and background experiences. So you're pulling in all these life experiences, all these different opinions and views, And how do you make that into a productive? How do you make that into a productive team? It doesn't guarantee that your team's going to be super productive if you hire like folks from all over the world. You need to have that sort of like common goal for the team. I'm going to cover 5 ways that diversity makes a difference. So first of all, if your team is diverse, you can match the customer's experiences much more closely. So whenever the customer has an issue with a product or service, there's a good chance you can respond to it much better if you understand the culture of the person, what their use case is, and just a bit of background about the customer base. If you're in a diverse team as well, more people have a voice in the room. Ideally, you should try and avoid being in meetings where everybody's just sitting and nodding along and just agreeing. You want to be in meetings where everybody has a voice. Like, it doesn't matter if they're an intern who just started last week or the senior guy who's been working in the industry for 40 years. If you work in a diverse team and people feel safe, everybody should have a voice, and that really makes a difference. If you have a diverse team, you're more likely to attract in diverse talent from across like industries. This is something that's, I think, a lot of organizations like underestimate. Like, it's not just about selling the image of the company as being diverse. Like, you want folks to generally be happy at doing what they're doing, and that attracts in other folks. That could be their connections on LinkedIn, it could be their friends, it could be family. But if folks can see that this organization is truly diverse and inclusive, they're going to want to work there because it's just great for your career. If you can get yourself into an organization, for example, I think Zendesk does a fantastic job. Workday, these places really embrace the importance of D&I. If you can get yourself into somewhere like that as your first job, it's just so good for your career. Alternatively, if you go into, I don't know, I don't want to single out finance or banking, but if you get yourself into a situation where you're working in a team where you're not really growing and learning, it's just not a good way to start your career, in my opinion. Maybe some folks have disagree with that. That's totally fine. But I think if you can get yourself into a highly functional, diverse team where everybody has a voice, it's just really good to boost your career and get you off to a good start. The other thing that is kind of common, whenever you work in an environment where you feel like you're trusted, you tend to take on more responsibility. You might come up with different solutions, take the product in different directions. You're much more likely to like broaden the scope of your experience within the team. If you work in a team where people are kind of closed off and maybe even a bit hostile at times, you're less likely to take on extra responsibility and broaden your perspectives. And then the other great thing about diverse teams, you'll notice that opportunities open up across your business and potentially even outside your business, different industries. If you can harness the power of diverse perspectives, and it's not easy, like it's diversity itself is a bit of a numbers game, but if you can make people feel included in a team and really get them working well together, like you're going to be so far ahead of many of your competitors. So you can start to fill in gaps in your business and also in the wider sort of industry. It can take you in a lot of directions that maybe you haven't considered before. Okay, so this is the $1 million question. Like, how do we create more diverse and inclusive teams? It's not easy. You can't buy it. There's no off-the-shelf solution. It just takes a lot of hard work. The answer that kind of matches the most is like build a psychologically safe workspace. Whenever folks feel safe, they act differently. They bring their true sort of selves to work. They're more open to asking questions, to sharing their experiences. If they work in an environment that isn't psychologically safe, they're probably just going to show up for a paycheck, and they probably won't really show their true selves because of fear. So that's part of the puzzle, is making people feel safe. The other part is make inclusion intentional. So something I've kind of seen over the past 20 years is I've seen teams that have grown from like a handful of people up to 50 or 60 engineers. And at the end of the hiring spree, they usually look back and ask the question like, how do we become diverse, or how do we make these teams inclusive? At that point, it's too late. Like, you've done your hiring, you've done your onboarding, everything's in place. You need to look at D&I from like the foundation or from the blueprint perspective. It should be built in to like every practice that you have within your organization or within your team. So you create a blueprint, and this is very similar to infrastructure. So for anybody who's used tools like Terraform or CloudFormation, you create a blueprint and then you use that for the rest of your infrastructure. The blueprint can be tested, it can be modified, it gives you a bunch of stuff for free. And this is the same sort of idea. You put together a blueprint that covers all these different practices within your team. So you can build stuff in like equity, accessibility, and accountability. And just to compare this to infrastructure, in infrastructure, you might create a template for infrastructure that gives you security measures. It might give you metrics, logging, just gives you it for free. And the same idea here, if you build these things into the blueprint, then every team that is built from this blueprint will get these things for free. So it avoids the need for every team to discover these topics themselves, and instead every team that's spun up will get these out of the box. And it's important to continuously improve the blueprints. Like, we live in a changing world. You have to keep the blueprint up to date with the latest sort of like trends and issues that folks may be kind of experiencing in their lives, particularly like if you work in the US at the moment, like things are kind of volatile, that you need to make sure that your blueprint can adopt to changes in society within the organization. Okay, and then you have to continuously test the blueprint. If you create this blueprint in 2015 and you're still using it today, like, the world is a very different place. You need to keep reevaluating your team and the organization. And some of the ways you can do that is just listening sessions, like organize sessions where your team members are just talking with managers and leaders and just get a general feel of the issues that they're hitting. Anonymous surveys are great, just to get that sort of honest feedback. And then regular team health checks. So I worked in a company once who had health checks every sprint. So every 3 weeks, they would do their sprint review where they're looking at the work that was done. And then they just do a very quick health check, like, how did you feel about this sprint? Like, did you introduce any tech debt? Was it satisfying for you? Was there anything you didn't like? So it's just very simple. It could be 3 or 4 questions, but it gives you that regular sort of feedback loop, so you can detect issues nice and early. And then once you have your blueprint set up, you just treat it like an open source project. Like, this should be completely visible to everybody in the organization. If there's a new team being spun up under infrastructure, they should have access to the blueprint. If it's a new development team, they should have access to the blueprint. It becomes completely transparent and continuously evolving as well. We're almost done. And it's important that the blueprint is used. Like, there's no point in putting together a blueprint and then just leaving it on Google Docs just to rot away and it never gets used. Like, every team that's spun up should be using the blueprint. And this gives you lots of extras just for free. If every team is based on this blueprint, then they all have similar ways of communicating, and they know how each team operates. There should be no surprises. I think at the moment in the tech industry, there's too much variance between teams. Some teams are really well run, like they operate at like military precision. Everything is documented. It's really tightly organized. And then some teams are just like, it's a bit like a frat house. Like, it's the only way I can describe it. There's a real sort of bro culture. Everything's on fire. People are constantly firefighting, stressed out. So there's too much variance. If you use this sort of approach where you have a blueprint for each team, you can kind of reduce that variance and you give everybody a solid foundation to start with. Once you have that solid foundation, then you can go on and start building your products that are accessible and inclusive of all. And I just have a few takeaways. These are just general sort of like, general sort of observations from myself. So first of all, like, if you want to build inclusive products, you need the team itself to be diverse and to welcome inclusion. Technologies and tools are great. Whenever you're starting out your career, you may like kind of chase after the next shiny tool that comes along, which is it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But really, like investing in yourself, like invest in your own emotional intelligence, because that's going to be with you from now until the day you retire. The technologies you're using now, they'll probably be gone in 5 or 10 years. So really focus on like, do you have any biases yourself? Kind of reflect on your own behavior and work, the words you use, and just kind of build yourself into a well-rounded human being who can go into any team and really have an impact. Yeah, you probably will have some situations where you're just a lone wolf working to try and solve problems. You can do very well. Like I've done that myself, but it is quite stressful. Like especially if you're working in a global organization, you'll have people like pinging you at all times of day. Like 3 o'clock in the morning, you're getting a call because a server's down. Ideally, get yourself into a really healthy, high functioning team where you have that sort of support. And that's going to help your career massively if you can do that as early as possible. And I think this is the last slide. Yeah, so just, I kind of said this earlier, like invest in yourself. Just like a lot of this is awareness. Up until 2 years ago, like I didn't really know what biases were. I didn't really have a good grasp on compassion, empathy, or neurodiversity. It's just about education. The more you can educate yourself and just generally treat people with respect, and like everybody has their own shit that they're going through. If you're in a team where maybe people aren't performing, like it's just being human with them can kind of take you a long way. And then self-reflection, just look at how you talk to people, your actions. Like many of you in future will become managers and leaders. Like I've seen a good share of leaders within the tech industry who don't self-reflect. They basically do the same stuff over and over again, and you kind of need to just look in the mirror and kind of ask yourself, is this the best example to be leading? And if it's not the best example, then you need to change things. And this next one is really, really hard. I still haven't mastered this myself. Like I'm not really confrontational, so I tend to dodge stuff. But if possible, if you're working in a team and somebody says or does something or acts in a certain way that doesn't align with your core values or that of the team or organization, I just try and call it out. Like you don't have to go super aggressive in their face. It can just be, you can just use words like, that's not the way we do it here, or that doesn't align with our values. But the earlier you call stuff out, like the easier things become. I've seen teams that kind of become super toxic because people are afraid to call out bad behavior. You don't really want to get yourself into that position. And it is really awkward. Like you need so much privilege to be able to do this. And I recognize that myself. Like I still can't do it, even though I like have most of the privileges that you can get. But it's just something to bear at the back of your mind. Calling this stuff out it's just a healthy thing to do. Like silence is complicity. So yeah. And that's it. Thanks very much for listening. I'm on Twitter a lot. If you want to know more about myself or ShipItCon, you can follow us. And then if you have any questions about the talk, or if you have any questions about just tech in general or games industry or just anything, just ping me. Like I'm happy to answer questions. And that's me.
Thank you again very much, Tom. Does anyone have any questions for Tom?
Maybe we just stop the recording forward because people might not want to ask questions if it's recording.
Perfect.